Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, Bean here, and today I'm coming at you with my most recent reads video. Now this is covering the books that I read throughout the month of July. Without any further ado, I am going to talk about the 9 most recent reads that I have since my last video. So, hopping right into it. The first book that I am going to talk about is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. I ended up giving this book a 5 out of 5, and it is probably one of my top thrillers as of right now. This is a story that has a dual timeline, so there are 2 different periods of time that this is following and 2 different women. The first woman is Viv, and the story takes place in 1982, and the second one takes place in 2017 and follows her niece, Carrie. Now, Viv has gone to this town and she has become a night receptionist at the Sundown Motel, and it's basically about her life there and what happens while she's there. And then the story parallels with Carlie's, who has gone to this town in order to figure out what happened to Viv. Because Viv, we learn, has vanished. No one knows where she is, so Carrie has taken it upon herself in order to go and try and figure out what happened to her aunt. Now, I found this story to be creepy, intriguing, intense, and also heart-wrenching at points, because this really talked a lot about how women were viewed, and there is racism, there is assault, there is attempted rape. There is a lot of stuff going on in this story that just makes it super intense. It's hard to think about some of these things, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. It is what it is, and that's it. One of the nice things that this story really talks about is it approaches relationships and the different types of relationships, being it with family, being it with friends, being it new budding relationships. And our obvious relationship in the story is Carlie's relationship with Nick, who is a boy who is staying at the motel basically indefinitely. He doesn't have anywhere else that he wants to go and doesn't really have anywhere else to go. So their whole dynamic, their story really becomes very intriguing and interesting and an integral part of this story. Basically, what we're doing is we're following as each of these characters are trying to figure out their past, but they're also trying to escape their past, and they're trying to figure out who they are and what they can do with where they're at right now. So I could go on and on about this book because I absolutely loved it. Like I said, I gave it a 5 out of 5, and I highly recommend it for those of you who are thriller fans. There is trigger warnings for murder, racism, sexism, as well as attempted rape and sexual assault. So be warned about that, but it was so well done. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I am going to talk about is a sequel. I finally read the second book in a series. Heaven forbid that I don't just read the first one. And that is The Cinderella Murder, which is the second book in the Under Suspicion series, which I started at the beginning of the month and plan on finishing soon, because as of right now, there are only 4 books, and I'm super excited about it. This is by Mary Higgins Clark and Alafair Burke, and I believe Alafair Burke is a new addition to this series. He just started writing with her on this book, and it didn't change the tone of the book at all. It was still a very intriguing, very interesting mystery. This series follows a TV producer named Lori, who has come up with the idea to start a show that is called Under Suspicion, hence the series name, where she goes to old cold cases and brings in a renowned psychologist named Alex, who comes in and interviews everybody who was involved in that murder, that mystery, whatever happened. And basically they try to solve these cold cases, and it's just bringing them back into attention, bringing attention to the victims. The first book was called I've Got You Under My Skin, and I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5. The second one is called The Cinderella Murder, and I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 because it really mirrored the first one in a lot of ways, and I look forward to seeing what happens in this series and how it continues on. The development of the relationships was really sweet to see, and I love the relationship between Lori and her father and her son, and how Alex fits into this picture, and then how her producers or her interns also fit into this, because they all just become one really big family, and I absolutely love how this is done, and I cannot wait to continue on with it. So like I said, this one got a 4.5 out of 5. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I actually have a physical copy of, and this was more, I've been wanting to read this for a while, and that is Here There Be Gerblins, the first book in the Adventure Zone graphic novel. And now this is by Clint, Griffin, Justin, and Travis McElroy, and Carrie Seitch. And I believe Carrie's the one who does the art in here, but if you don't know, the Adventure Zone is a Dungeons & Dragons podcast that I am completely obsessed with. Their first season is the Adventure Zone, and it is the first time really that these brothers and their dad delve into D&D, and their characters are hilarious. The art in this story is so great, and I just really can't recommend this enough. If you listen to the podcast, read this. If you don't listen to the podcast, read this. It's so great. It's so much fun, and I learned a lot. I actually, as weird as it is, I learned a lot about D&D by listening to this podcast. The McElroys also have several other podcasts. They're a big podcasting family, and the three brothers do one called My Brother, and I, or they call it My Bim Bam, which I really love as well. And I just cannot recommend this humor enough, and it's such a great story. The third one in this series just came out. They are a little bit pricey because they are full graphic novels, but I think that they are totally worth it, and I will definitely be reading this again. And I know that Mike is also going to be reading this, but it's really quick, really easy to get through, and I highly recommend it, guys. So if you actually have to ask, this got a 5 out of 5. The next book that I listened to actually was an audiobook, and it was a reread, and that is Dangerous Minds, which is the second book in the Night and Moon series by Janet Evanovitch. This story follows Riley Moon and Emerson Knight. Riley Moon is a financial advisor that ends up getting hired on as an assistant, basically, to Emerson Knight, who is a very eccentric billionaire who really just wants to be Sherlock Holmes. And he is brilliant, he is attractive, and he has no social graces whatsoever. So it's a very adorable story about them solving mysteries, as she really just doesn't want to be solving these mysteries, but he keeps dragging her into it, and ends up that they work through a lot of different things, and it's really cute. It's a really sweet, it's just a duology, but this series always gets me out of any sort of reading slump that I have been in, and I love the fact that this is easy. You can kind of just jump into it, and the characters are not complex. They're really not. Janet Evanovitch, for me, most of her writings all have very strong female characters. I find they might follow some sort of stereotype if you're looking at that, but Riley Moon, for instance, grew up in Texas, so she can shoot, she can hunt, she is sassy to no end, and she also is very intelligent. She has a business degree from Harvard, and she knows what she wants, but unfortunately is having a hard time getting there because of what happened in the first book. So, without anything spoiling that, but I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5. I enjoy it. I know exactly what's going to happen, so it's never a surprise to me anymore. But I do highly recommend Janet Evanovitch's writing. She is known for writing very smart characters, and for just, it's a cute romance story. So just go read it, guys. There's no smut, there's nothing like that, but it is still really cute, I think. The next book that I read was The Hollows, which is number 26 in the Hercule Poirot series by Agatha Christie. Look how far I've gone. So this one I ended up giving a 3 or a 3.52. I'm kind of still tossing up between the two, but this was probably one of the more psychological stories I've read in the Hercule Poirot series. All of them examine people as, like, psychologically what they are, basically, because it is a murder mystery. But this one really seemed to be less of a Poirot story, because he didn't appear until over halfway through the book. And there was a lot less about the murder itself, and it was much more about the psychological aspects of a house full of people who are basically in love with each other. So it was fine, not one that I would read again, so it's probably going to end up sitting at about a 3 out of 5. The next book that I'm going to talk about is one that I ended up half reading and half listening to the audiobook for, because NetGalley now does some audiobooks, so that was super exciting. And that book is The Shadows by Alex North. This is a thriller, and it is blood, guts, and gore. Like, it's very psychological, but it's also, there is blood, guts, and gore. One of the main premises of this, one of the main themes, I guess you could say, one of the most reoccurring images in this book is the image of red handprints everywhere. And they are bloody handprints that are found everywhere. So this is a dual perspective and dual timeline story. It is told from the point of view, the first person that we hear from is Paul Adams, who is our main character, and he is the first perspective we hear, the first time we hear from him is in basically the current day, when he is going back to this small town where he grew up, where he was involved in a case looking for who had killed a friend of his. And he's going back to this town because his mother is dying, and he wants to be there since he hasn't seen her in over 25 years. And his second perspective is from 25 years ago, on the night or on the months leading up to this murder that happens in the small town. Now, this murder is of a young person in Adam's class, and the person that they end up figuring out committed this crime vanished. They have no idea where he is. He took this, three of Adam's friends ended up going into the woods with the plan of murdering one of those kids, and one of them does end up getting murdered, and one of them ends up vanishing. And so it's very convoluted and very confusing at points, but Alex North did an amazing job of explaining this. The second perspective we get is of a detective years later who's attempting to figure out why everyone is coming back to this town now, and why all of a sudden there is a copycat murder going on. So it is very intense, very intriguing, and this book gave me the chills. This book was so well done, and as much as it's difficult for me to explain it, I can honestly say that I enjoyed this book. I was captivated the entire time. And now that I look back, there's so much foreshadowing going on, and it's creepy. This is basically a tale of how a ghost story can affect a town. And I don't want to get too much more into this because I don't want to spoil anything, but this book was so intense, and I cannot recommend it enough for any of you out there who enjoy thrillers. There is blood, guts, and gore. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, so highly, highly recommend this. The next book that I'm going to talk about is one that was probably my favorite book of this month, and that's Girl Serpentthorne by Melissa Bashardoust, I think is how you say it. I'm sorry, I am terrible, in case you haven't figured it out with my videos. I am terrible at pronunciation of names, including my own sometimes. This book, oh my goodness, it's not long. Let me just start off with that. It is not a long book, but so much happens in this book. I actually was listening to the audiobook again, partially for this one, and I stopped at one point and just froze, like, what just happened? There were so many twists and turns. There was so much going on. This book follows Soraya, who is a girl who was born with a curse. And now this curse is that she has poison running through her veins. So whenever she touches someone's skin on skin, she kills them almost instantly. And it can be a person, it can be an animal, anything. She will kill them instantly. And so this is all about her and her family and her wanting to get rid of this curse. And there's demons, there's fae, there's romance, oh my gosh, this book was just so good, guys. It was just so good. And honestly, I think one of my favorite things about Soraya as our main character is that she grows so much in this story, and you really learn that she's figuring herself out because she has been isolated. She's been kept a secret for the majority of her life, and all of a sudden she's out and she's talking to people, and she's like, wait, what makes a monster? What makes a princess? What makes all of it is such an intense story, and it's so well done. It is beautiful. So this book is, if I had to come up with it, it is part Sleeping Beauty, part Rapunzel, but it's based in a very dark and creepy folktale. Dark and very creepy Persian folktale, I believe. So super well done. I cannot emphasize that enough, and I really want to talk about spoilers, but I won't because I'm going to be good and not do that. But I would have to say that a main theme in this book is the theme of trust, and it's who do you trust? Can you trust the people closest to you? And then it's also about a breach of that trust and about assault on your mind and on what you believed someone, you trusted them to do something, you trusted that they wanted to look after you, whatnot, and then they broke the trust, and it's a lot about that as well. So it's not just about Soraya, but she plays such an I'm having trouble talking about this book because I thought it was so well done that this book basically deserves a video in and of itself. So I will talk with Callison because Callie also read this book, and she's the one who pushed me to read it, and I'm so glad that she did. But in case you haven't figured out from my blabbing on about it, it got 5 out of 5 from me. So yes, highly recommend, guys. Go read this book. It's so well done, and it's not a long book. It's a quick read. I read this in a day and a half. The only reason why it took longer was because I started it at 10 p.m. and I fell asleep because I was super tired. All right, almost there at the end, guys. The next book that I read is one that I have been meaning to read for a very, very long time, and that is The Dreadful Tale of Prosper Redding. This is the first book in the Prosper Redding duology, I believe, by Alexandra Bracken. This book follows Prosper Redding, who is in a family of people who are just amazing at doing all sorts of things. They are super impressive at whatever it is that they decide to do. Now, the reason for this, we find out, is because years and generations ago, his great something or other uncle, I believe, made a deal with a demon. And now it turns out that this demon has come back and has basically possessed Prosper, but also hasn't. He's basically stuck as a voice in Prosper's head that can kind of take over his body, but he's not strong enough to completely possess Prosper. And it basically, the demon's name is Alastair, and Alastair basically reminded me of that little devil that people have on their shoulders that you talk about, you see in movies all the time in cartoons. That's what Alastair was to me. He's like, oh, you should do this, you should, and Prosper's like, shut up, don't tell me these things. But Prosper is 12 years old in this book, and you're reminded of that. He acts like a 12-year-old, and I love it so much. Prosper has never been very good at much of anything, but he has been stuck in a family that is super good at everything. And so he has never felt as though he fits in with his family, and it's all about him trying to figure out why that is, and he's trying to figure out if he wants to help this demon who wants to destroy his family, basically, when Prosper doesn't really have many connections to it and connections to them in general. Also, my favorite character is a flying bat cat named Toad. He's a changeling, and I think he's the cutest thing ever. But that's besides the point. While I did predict quite a bit of this story, especially towards the last quarter of it, I really enjoyed it, and I think this is one that definitely should be read. And I know I have a friend who has a son who she says she's always struggling to find middle grade stories for him that feature males as the main character. And this is a series that all young boys and young girls should read because it is so great. It is so hilarious. Yeah, I highly recommend it. So I did end up giving this a 4 out of 5, 3.5 to 4, because I did predict it. Parts of it were a little bit draggy and I wasn't too interested in everything, but it was super well done and I really appreciated it. And I do plan on reading the sequel in August, so be on the lookout for that. And the last book that I am going to talk about is a novella that I read, and it is called The Ghosts of Sherwood. It is the first book in the Robin Hood stories by Carrie Vaughn. Now, this is a new series that just came out this year. I believe it came out in May. Yes, I think it was May. It was either May or June, one of the two it came out in. And this was like just over 100 pages. It was short. It was amusing. It followed the family of Robin Hood so this takes place after the Robin Hood stories. So Robin Hood and Maid Marian have gotten married and they're living in Locksley in the palace, castle, whatever it is he lives in. His very, very, very big house. I'm having trouble with words and naming things today. And they have 3 children, and this follows their 3 children as they go on a little miniature adventure. And it is super cute. It was predictable through and through, but it was cute. Will I read it again? I don't know. I wasn't really blown away by it. I wasn't super impressed by it, but I did enjoy it. So I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5. So that is all I have here for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments what you think, if you have any recommendations for what I read next month, or if you have any thoughts on the books that I read this past month. So I would love to hear from you guys. Now is the perfect time, if you enjoyed this video, to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe if you want to. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and if you want to be reminded whenever we post these videos, feel free to hit the little bell icon down below. And that's what we have for you guys here today. All of our information and contacts stuff and all of our social medias are down in the description down below. And we'll see you guys next time. Until then, bye!